up. And that is all kinds of exciting and maybe a little bit terrifying at the same time, because I think we can all agree that although there's a part of our brain that tells us this is not going to be the same and work is going to look different, there's also a part of our brain that's just not really accepting to change, that is saying, no, it'll be fine, it'll be just like it always was. And, you know, let's hope for the latter, but expect the former. So today we're kind of discussing the fact that we have been off for a while and our employees may not be in the same physical condition that they were when they left. And for those of us that have employees that have been either on layoff completely or on reduced hours or reduced capacity in some way, then it really is an expectation that you should have. And on top of everything else that you have going on with putting in new safety measures and testing and all of this, it's just a good idea to not let ergonomics sink to the bottom of the to-do pile. And I think right now, when we're trying to find things to take off, that may be happening for a lot of us. We may be seeing that, you know what, okay, ergonomics will be for when we're back up and running fully, and you know we're at our regular rates and everything's going smoothly, because that's when, you know, some of those high repetitions and whatnot are really going to be expected. But the fact of the matter is that these employees that have been off really may not be capable of performing at some of the rates that we were before. So we're going to look at some of the expected trends of what we're going to see when we return to work. I don't think any of these are going to be earth-breaking to many of you. We're going to definitely cover off some of the effects of deconditioning, what those timelines look like, and how you can expect them to affect just daily work. And then what maybe some of the increased hazards are due to our added safety measures, and how we can integrate some of those ergonomic principles to maybe waylay some of our claim potential. So in getting started, we have kind of, we'll start off, I guess, on the negative and we'll build to the positive. So people are coming back to work. We are seeing a lot of people that feel that, you know, no, I can do my job from home. And now there's maybe a push or an expectation that they are going to be allowed to work from home permanently, and that could be maybe something that's built in. And maybe for your industry, that's a possibility, and that would be great in some cases. But for those of us where it's not, you know, going to be what we want to move forward to, we want to bring people back to work into an office setting, then that's going to be a little bit political. But even for those that are being allowed to work remotely, we'll talk in a minute about, you know, some of the issues that are still going to come with that. And then we just have that whole increased fear and anxiety regarding around just being around people again. For those of us that have been coming to work day in and day out, maybe it's less scary, less anxious, but now you're having more people come back. So, you know, there's plants that, yes, the office staff have gone home, but the manufacturing or the industrial side of the plant has kind of hummed along at some capacity. I know my husband's plant, as I said, office staff for the most part are working remotely with the exception of a few. So the office is a bit of a graveyard, but in this situation, that's a positive. And the industrial side of the plant, they've been given optional laid off. So they're still looking at a chunk of their industrial workers not being present. And now we're seeing this influx. All of a sudden, what was once easy to social distance because there was less people around may become harder. And there's going to be fear and anxiety about that. There's been enough media attention about COVID-19 that I don't think there's anyone going through this that isn't suffering from some degree of those. So we should be expecting an increase in absenteeism, whether it's as a result of the desire to work from home, the fear, the anxiety, or whether it's just the ongoing increase of cases that are going to be happening. I mean, as we go out into the world, there's going to be an expectation that our COVID cases are going to go up, at least to some degree. So we may have production expectations for a day, and if we're doing testing before we come in and that person has a temperature, we send them home. That's now an able body that we do not have, and we have to fill that slot. So we're going to be juggling with scheduling and trying to figure out how we're going to deal with these absenteeisms, and especially when, this isn't a cold, they're not going to be gone for 1 or 2 days. They now need to self-quarantine for 14 days again. So how are we going to navigate that? And then Emma, I keep saying MOL, I should change. The MLTSD, they're expecting to see a lot more unsafe work claims coming through. So people feeling that the social distancing or the safety measures in place are not sufficient, and that they're claiming that the workplace is unsafe, in which case we follow our work refusal procedures, and that's going to be, an expectation that we're going to see happening as well. So as I said, this is the non-happy slide, and these are all things that I don't think anyone isn't thinking about in the back of their heads and thinking, okay, yeah, we're gonna have to deal with this, that these are going to have to be things in place. So any programs that you have that are going to be impacted by these things are things that we're definitely going to want to make sure are a little bit tighter, that we have kind of our dialogue, our choreography as far as how we're going to deal with those settled down. Because, our schools closed, I think March, it says 14th, sorry, my screen's getting covered, and lockdown went into effect March 17th. So we've been off for over 2.5 months, and we have to understand that physical and cognitive deconditioning has happened for a lot of us. Specifically, more so the ones that have been on layoff rather than on reduced workload. But we definitely will see that what we were doing is now potentially going to cause us problems. So when we look at our kind of deconditioning timeline, this is kind of roughly, and I will say roughly, but I'll give you an idea of what's happened to the human body during this 2.5 months that we've been off. So within week 1, if we have gone on layoff, or even the reduced workload, if we're not active to the same degree that we once were, we will start seeing decreases in range of motion and stiffness start setting in within week 1. It is that quick. So we then quickly fall into, once we start having kind of maybe a decreased range of motion or stiffness setting in because of lack of inactivity and lack of muscle use, we will go into that reduction in strength. In the next slide, we'll kind of talk about what rate that is, and it's actually really quite shocking. And any of you that have followed any kind of fitness regime at all in your lifetime will know, you go to the gym once and you could be on a 6-month really diligent, routine, and then you're off for a few weeks, and it's like you've gone back to the very beginning or very close to. So you kind of understand and see how quickly the body wants to revert to kind of more of a, I guess, at-rest state. So then we have our endurance. Our endurance will start being impacted between weeks 2 and 3, and that means we're going to start seeing an impact to any job that has high repetition. We are not going to be able to keep up with production demands because that endurance is just not there. We don't have the muscle strength, we don't have the endurance. And so these 3 are kind of where we may start to see an increased jump in reported incidents or claims coming through. Week 4, it's just a cumulative impact from weeks 2 and 3, where now our body is having that Mack truck effect. We're not able to do physically the strength load that we once were able to. We're not able to keep up with the high production rates that we were once able to. And as a result, at the end of the day, we're exhausted. There is a huge amount of fatigue happening. So as of week 4, we then start to see, the scale may be going up or down. And I say up or down because depending on your metabolism depends on which direction they go. If you have a really high metabolism and your job gave you maybe some kind of muscle strengthening ability, like if you had a fairly, physical job, then you may have quite a bit of muscle mass that you've now lost. So you may actually lower your weight, but to more of a detriment. It's more of a frail status rather than, oh, yay, I lost weight. And then we have, for I think the most of us in the population, it hasn't in my household anyways, it has not been, smoothies and salads and the high activity levels here. It's been a lot of stress eating, maybe a lot of alcohol consumption, and a lot of things just kind of going on where we're trying to just deal with the stress. And, we have our kids around, so we may be making dinners and stuff that will cater to them, whereas normally they'd be at school and they would have their lunch and we would have made something maybe a healthier choice for ourselves. So either way, we start to see that week 4, we've been hovering and playing with the scale up until now, but now that weight is more solidified. We now are seeing that actual weight gain, and we are on week 10 or, going up there. So we've now seen 2.5 months. This is only 1 month. So you can understand how cumulative these effects will be the longer we have our employees off. So as we bring them back, we then start to see that some of these, what are the effects of these? Sorry, I'm very bad with the clicking on these. So first off, we have our decreased range of motion. This is what's starting at the very kind of onset of our leave or reduced work. And again, this one is age dependent. So the older we are, our range of motion may be higher, or our loss of range of motion may be higher. Specifically, if we're suffering from alternative health issues, arthritis being the number one. If arthritic people have been at rest, then kind of jump starting that whole movement can be more challenging, specifically in the broader ranges of motion of what the body is capable of. So, and that starts within days of inactivity. So then we have our loss of muscle mass. So this was in around, as I said, weeks 2 or 3, but we were losing as much as 1 to 3% a day. So we really start to see our strength ability go down, not being able to lift the things we once were able to, not being able to grip or hold on to the things that were once not a problem whatsoever. And if your jobs are high in the manual handling or dexterity, then those muscle atrophies are going to be impactful for your claims when people come back. Definitely the reduced endurance, whether you are office, whether you're manufacturing. If we have been on reduced workload and now we're jumping up to 8 hours, that's going to have some fatigues. And we lose endurance within the first 1 to 2 weeks, and it's up to 7%. So we're going to start to see kind of those slowdowns and people just not able to keep up with the production that we were once able to put up there. And as I said, we're going to then have this lower fitness, this increased weight, which are also going to increase our fatigue and just our general kind of slow down effect that we're going to see. So we need to be, as employers, trying to be understanding with that up front. Use yourself potentially. I mean, most of us have been probably on the hot seat through this ongoing pandemic and trying to make sure that everyone is safe and that we're covering off all the new standards and, or maybe standards, but guidelines as far as COVID safety measures. And so we may not have slowed down as some of our employees have. So, but if you are feeling it, you can imagine that they are feeling it as well. So now let's kind of get into, that's what's happened to the employees. Okay, we know we're weaker, we're slower, we're not as mobile, and we may be carrying a little bit more extra weight. So that's the physical. I'm not going to get into a ton. I'm on the mental deconditioning, but if we've been off trying to jumpstart the brain into getting back into a work mode that we haven't been in for 2.5 months can be challenging. There's studies out there that say if we change tasks after 10 minutes, that it still takes several minutes before we're able to get back productively into a task, and what we've been off for several minutes, more than that. So now we're going to look at kind of the impacts of some of these hazards. So, we've seen the top row of those circles all kind of going down, and now we're asking that bottom row to all increase. And without consideration or adjustment, you may find that we start having just a jump in MSD type claims, because yes, there's a cognitive aspect that may be, fear and more mental and anxiety coming into play there. But we also have a very physical, just equation that doesn't balance out. If we have high forces and our once able workers are not able to handle those, then we're right back to kind of our newer employees. The problem is we don't have anyone else to kind of offset the work. Everyone's going to be in the same boat. So it's almost like a startup situation, with the exception of don't have startup production expectations. Our production expectations are going to be roughly what they were when they left. And maybe that's not practical right now, because our workforce is a startup workforce for all intents and purposes. So when we start looking at kind of where are we going with this and what some of those increased hazards are, let's just start off with the remote worker. So for some of us, we're actually looking at keeping people at home. It may end up being a cost savings. We may be able to lower our real estate footprint and go to a smaller office. I know a lot of the telecommunication industries out there are embracing this. So it's definitely something to consider. However, just to put a pin in the whole remote worker conversation, we were all kind of doing it when this started, but we were doing it with the mindset that this was temporary. So what we were willing to do and what we were going to spend and the time, allotment we were willing to invest in a remote worker policy or program may have all been with the intention that, okay, this is for temporary remote work. And so that sets the bar at a lower level, right? We developed a remote worker, and it was strictly to help through the COVID situation. So it was, we were told on the 17th we were in lockdown. We had lots of our employees heading home and working on their kids' desks, on their dining room table, on their couch, in their bed was a very common one. A lot of people, because it was quiet, would work on their bed. So very unergonomic workstation setups. But so the whole program that we developed was very intentional on, we don't need to be running around spending a ton of money on the bougiest equipment out there. There are solutions that you can find at home. The key point to that is they were temporary solutions. You cannot sit on pillows for day in and day out, months upon months. Those pillows will disintegrate very quickly. They're not designed to be sat on and provide, an element of elevation. So we now need to maybe change gears. And although we maybe have a handle on that remote worker situation, we need to broaden it. We need to understand, what are we going to supply? What are we going to offer? What are our expectations? I think the scheduling and the productivity element we got, for those of us that were managing remote workers, we probably got pretty good at it. The whole, interactive calls, making sure, I know for those of people that I know that were working remotely, sometimes they were working way more hours because they were almost working their travel hours as well, because they weren't normally home. So they were actually spending longer amounts of time. And so that is a trend that you should be expecting to continue. Those at-work remote workers are going to potentially be at their computers longer. And if those workstations are not set up properly, are not CSA compliant, and I'm going to say that a lot today, that we're then going to see, again, that increase in issues and concerns and MSDs. So the main ones that I think that people were kind of jerry-rigging and using Band-Aid solutions for were definitely the chair. The chair is going to be probably the biggest expense that you need to consider and determine how, as an organization, you're going to ensure that those remote workers are safe as far as MSD hazards go. And working heights is probably the next one. It's not the hardest, and definitely there's some more available solutions at better price points at those. And whether or not we're going to stick with a laptop setup, because there are a lot of issues from an ergonomic standpoint that come with using laptops. And if we continue that, then we may start seeing increases in NMSDs as well. So as far as the remote workers go, it's more about not that their workstations are changing, but maybe they should. We trained literally hundreds upon hundreds of people, employees, on the remote work setup. And when we polled them conclusively across the board, 66, I think, was the average. 66% of employees said they were not set up correctly. So that is not something you have in the workplace where you have kind of more ergonomically designed workstations. We do not have 66% of the workforce working in a poor setup. So that's just a number that you may want to consider kind of going forward, because if we haven't addressed it, we really need to, so that we don't start seeing those injuries kind of keep pouring in. So then we kind of get into those that are coming back to the office, and how does that work? You know, are we plexiglassing? How are we social distancing? You know, we've heard a lot of strategies, and there's a lot of strategies out there. I know the government has put some guidelines out there on how to reintegrate workers back into work. WorkSafe BC is one of the sites I've looked at, and that has a fairly extensive list. So there's lots of resources out there. However, from my reading, it looks and follows very much a scheduling and rotation and hour kind of method of social distancing. So, you know, people are on rotating shifts, or, you know, you have day A and day B, and you're going to come in on day A, and we're going to use every other workstation. You're going to come on day B, or we're going to, you know, morning and afternoon. So they're not necessarily looking at the physical workstation. They're really looking at changing the structure, but which isn't really still bringing people back necessarily full time. So the biggest issue that I see is that 66% of the people had poor workstations working at home, and they were off for 2.5 months. You work in a poor workstation for 2.5 months, and there will be physical effects, whether it's a full-blown MSD or whether it's general discomfort or muscle tension. But now, what was an okay workstation before they left, now maybe a problematic workstation when they come back, because they are bringing issues that developed while they were off back into the work office. So we may start seeing an increase in complaints in discomfort at the office workstation, and you're sitting there scratching your head going, this is a better workstation that they had at home, and they had no issues with it before. Yeah, but it all has to do with that whole, these are things that developed in the interim. So we then have kind of the cognitive implication. As I said, we're not touching a ton of this, but you know, when we're looking at return to work, which will be one of the slides we're talking about shortly, you know, we do need to have an understanding of what the cognitive demands are, and if those cognitive implications or anxieties that are coming in, is the individual still able to perform the essential duties of their job from a cognitive perspective. So, and then we have bad habits. I know I am one of these. So what's gotten to be a bad habit, I think whether it's through stress, whether it's because, you know, I'm constantly being diverted to help my children with their schoolwork, but I have developed this habit of just like leaning in and craning my neck to see my computer. Granted, my computer is exactly where it should be. It is at CSA guidelines, but it's a habit that I've just developed. I think it's because I'm constantly kind of leaning across my computer to see what my kids are doing, because we're all working at the dining room table because that's what works best for us. And yeah, we're just not, it's not something I've ever done, but now as soon as I sit down, I notice I do it whether the kids are with me or not. So some of these bad work habits that we've developed, work habits, well, that's not exactly the best writing, but we're looking at bringing those into the workplace as well. So again, what was okay may now not be because of our little remote work situation. And then we have our more industrial work sites. So we have assembly workstations that, you know, if you were working throughout the COVID, you may have less issues, which is great because they're very much accustomed to it. But again, we may start seeing just an influx of people because we may have had some of the staff off on layoff. Not everyone went home. And so there's just more people to contend with. So when we're trying to social distance and keep our safety measures in place, we have that to be prepared for. We then have added PPE. If we're using face shields as part of our social distancing and safety measures, well, if those get smudged or they get condensation or steam, that type of thing coming up because we're also still wearing masks potentially, then if our task is visual, we're going to start seeing negative effects. We're going to start seeing ergonomic or muscular resulting issues because of the PPE that we're wearing. And lastly, there's to consideration that if we are social distancing, if you have been able to kind of work around your facility and figure out a way of creating more space, which is something that, from a COVID side, I would think that a lot of people are trying to do, but that's going to be increasing potentially travel time or so lowering production rates, as well as increasing the manual material handling of products. How far we're traveling to get them places may be impacted. So just some of the things that, issues that weren't there before. So in the beginning, we looked at just the job as how it was. If you have high forces, if you have high repetition or awkward postures, the deconditioning effect, they're not going to align very well anymore. But now we may actually have increased hazards, ergonomic hazards, as a result of the safety measures that we're putting in. And I will be, one of the first to tell you that when it comes to a boxing match between ergonomics and safety, for the most part, ergonomics takes the silver home because we don't usually win out on that, and rightly so. No one's going to die from an ergonomic injury. However, when we're looking at a recession, we're looking at potentially decrease in capital or funds that we're producing, and we're starting to see claims increase, it's a hard act to balance when we're starting to see some of the things that we were once able to be profitable on now not so much because we have increased claims. And that's kind of the point of this webinar, is to try and get people prepared mentally and their programs prepared to really be able to handle this juggling act that you guys are all going to have to do. So now is a great time, as we're kind of ramping up and not everything is open, but maybe you're bringing people back in slowly. This is an ideal time to kind of perform those ergonomic inspections, getting your supervisors, your lead hands involved, and really looking for practical solutions that are going to allow our deconditioned employees to work safely. So identifying things that are requiring muscle strength, endurance, or static posturing, or those high frequency awkward postures. So we can start prioritizing. If we're sitting there trying desperately to get all our measures in place for, safety, we can't address. We physically don't have the time capacity to address all of the ergonomic issues that we knew were there before, plus the new ones that have been added. So we need to take those, frontline workers, those supervisors, those lead hands, those that have a really practical idea of what needs to get done and what needs to get fixed, and add some of those into those safety measures that we're working on, because without them, that scale is tipping, and it's not tipping favorably for us. So some other things to consider would be, looking at whether you're looking at your essential duties, looking at your physical demands analyses or your job descriptions, and really determining what elements need to be done and what elements don't. Specifically, if those non-essential or kind of assumed tasks are physical in nature, those are things that we want to be able to tell people, you know what? No, we're not doing this right now. We're just focusing on this. This will be integrated as you go on. And that's kind of, it's part of a work hardening program. And that's how we want to be looking at this, is how can we keep production moving, but work in kind of a work hardening way, which I agree is not going to be easy. But looking at some of those non-essential tasks may be kind of low-hanging fruit that you can add in and not add in. Do the opposite of add in, take away to lower the physical load so these until the employees become more conditioned to work. Focus on your essential duties. Maybe we can look at those scheduling options that the work integrated guidelines are providing us, and seeing if those are going to be feasible or doable for us are definitely ways that we can kind of minimize and work harden. At the very end, if we're looking at this in a very glasses half empty, we need to make sure our return to work practices are up to snuff. We need to make sure any gaps that we've had in the past, that we try and close them, and just prepare ourselves for those, legal accommodation requirements. At the end of the day, if you're doing safe practices at work that kind of align with the COVID guidelines, then the employees are required to return to work if a job is available to them. And I'm sure that's not news to any of you. So it just means that a conversation is going to happen a lot for many of you. And knowing what we're going to say, how we're going to prepare, if you have like a forum of people that maybe bounce some of those ideas, talk to your supervisors about that conversation, because they're probably going to hear it first, and get some verbiage out there on that whole return to work and accommodation COVID now puzzle that we're working with, because, we were pretty good at dealing with accommodation and return to work before this all started. But now a lot of people, as I said, there's that whole cognitive part, and that's going to weigh heavy on some people. I would say, personally, I am a very chill person. Not much ruffles my feathers. Sky could be falling and I'd be like, oh, and I should go for cover. And that would be about as much of a reaction you're going to get out of me. And I can't say that was the case through this whole COVID situation. So, I feel if I'm having adverse reactions to it, then there's people out there having much worse reactions than I am. So adding that into that return to work conversation, the return to work program, and just being prepared for it so that we're not caught off guard, so that the communication is consistent and clear, because if we add inconsistency, that's only going to heighten people's fear and anxiety around the situation. So when we look at our return to work strategies, as I said, we want to make sure that those essential duties are clearly identified. So start asking your questions. At the end of the day, there's cleaning that happens. Everyone kind of cleans up after themselves, which might be hauling out a huge garbage. Is that essential? Do we have a cleaning staff on another shift that, does that anyways, or would do that anyways? So really kind of just going through with a fine-tooth comb, and again, using your supervisors, your lead hands to help guide that conversation, but really looking at what are the physical elements of the jobs that we could maybe pare out and remove temporarily through a work hardening effort. And potentially we could still use those non-essential tasks, but maybe we use them as more of a job rotation. So for many of us, the question will be, are we going to still allow remote work to happen? Is that an option? And does their at-home equipment change? Are we going to provide a monetary allowance for them to improve and make a more robust workstation at home? What are our strategies there that this is no longer temporary and more of a permanent solution to our working conditions? Again, your mental health strategies, this is going to be looking probably for those of you that have them, or even if you don't, maybe consider having them, but looking at your cognitive demands and seeing what can I do there to help me as, a health and safety, HR, or return to work, personnel who deals with that, to help you just navigate that conversation with the employee, the doctor, heaven forbid, but, WSIB, but being prepared for that conversation and saying, what, I understand this person has anxiety, but at the end of the day, the restrictions and limitations this person's feeling, we can accommodate them at work. Or if not, what could you do potentially from a remote work, specifically if they have been working remotely already? And then if we have taken a step and looked at our production rates and said, what, we need to take a step back. We need to look at ourselves as more of a startup company again, and maybe we need to pare things down. For some of us, that may happen organically. We may not have the sales to produce what we once did. And so that's great. But if we don't, and we still need to kind of consider injury reduction as part of the strategy, then we also want to make sure that from a return to work aspect, that anything that we had that outlined our production being at such and such a rate, we need to make sure that that is being accurately described. As claims start to come in, we don't want to be feeding WSIB or doctors information that's saying we're doing rates that we're not, because it's going to waylay your process and just make it more arduous than it needs to be. So looking at making sure that all of our documentation is just kind of on point really is what this slide is about, and being just ready for the storm. You know, we were in one storm, now we're going into a different one. We're just getting very weathered these days. So some of the things that we can do to kind of look at work hardening, as I said, we can try and decrease our activity and our work duration, and this is what's going through the integrated work guidelines that have been put out there. For a lot of us, this isn't necessarily doable, but maybe what we can do in an effort to decrease those production rates, as well as alter tasks that are physical to non-physical, specifically if you are an industry that has a lot of safety concerns, this is an opportunity that, as a due diligence, we really should be going through refresher training. We should be looking at all of our safety measures and teaching people, you know, really how to address the safety of our organization again. Because 2.5 months of, you know, high stress, homeschooling, social distancing, you know, we have not been thinking about, you know, how to pour molten metal, or, you know, how to even drive. You know, I got in my car for the first time, I think about a month ago, and I was like, oh my God, this feels surreal. So there should be, as part of our work integration strategies, a retraining refresher component, and that works really, really well as a work hardening kind of rotation of tasks option. So it aligns nicely. So not only are we doing it from a due diligence safety perspective, but it's also going to allow us to say, okay, you know, you're going to go be working for 2 hours, and then we'd like you to come in and we'd like you to do refresher training, and maybe they're sitting at their computers. I mean, there is potentially a social distancing component that we need to consider here. We're not bringing people into boardrooms, or if you are, then how are you doing that? But all of that needs to be considered there. So it's a good thing. It gives us something that our people are going to still be able to perform an 8-hour day potentially, but not necessarily with the same physical demands, because they're going to be going back and refreshing on their safety training. And for sure, ergonomics should be part of that. If we've been laid off and not doing anything physical, body awareness and how to, you know, work mechanically in a positive light is important, and people don't think of it until they're hurting. So it's not something you can think of as, oh, you know, they'll just automatically do it properly. Nope, bad habits formed. Injuries may have occurred. People are guarding, people are compensating. So doing your ergonomic refresher awareness training, make people aware of, you know, body positioning while they're working, and working smarter, not harder, moving things, using assists. All of that is a great opportunity now to kind of embed their fresh again. Let's get it started off on the right foot. As I said earlier, rotating in your non-essential tasks could also be, you know, work hardening, specifically if they're non-physical. And if we haven't been able to look at job rotation in the past, maybe we can look at it now. And if there's an opportunity to rotate those kind of physical into less physical jobs, then that may be also a tool that you could use to create balance for reconditioning. And kind of just not postponing ergonomics. As I said earlier, it's kind of one of those things where I think right now, when our cup is very, very full, the thought of dealing with ergonomics, which is never easy, I understand that. It's my job to understand that. And it just seems a bit insurmountable. Let's find ways it can be kind of achieved in at least small doses. So if we can improve or eliminate any ergonomic hazard that's going to minimize an employee's capability, then that's going to allow them to adjust into work much quicker than if those hazards were there. And the double added bonus is at the end of the day, when they do recondition, if those changes are able to remain permanent and you've improved or eliminated any kind of physicality in the workload, then the chances are their ability to produce more is there, right? So if we were once able to do, 100 pieces in an hour, and now we've taken out all the force, well, now we can maybe do 2. So there's huge opportunity here, and there just be more motivation to try and achieve some of these things right now, because we know our workforce isn't necessarily able to handle some of those higher demands. So changes will allow your workforce to allow easier and hopefully without injury. One other thing you could consider is some kind of conditioning program. If we go to the gym for the first time, there's no matter who we are or what our physical condition is, if we've taken a bit of a hiatus from our physical activities, then we usually are a little bit more cautious when we step back into them, because we understand that the muscles in the body is not in the same condition it once was. And so if we're in the gym or we're playing a sport, we may take that extra time to warm up, to stretch, to prepare our bodies for the physical activity. Well, why should that be any different in the workplace? And depending on the level of physicality of your work, of your industry, then that may change. If it's an office environment, maybe we want to do just generic stretching, provide those people stretching, because they're not necessarily lifting anything. They may be doing some high repetition tasks in the hands. They may have some static movements, but maybe we're going to address that more in a stretching program. But if we do have high physicality in the job, then this may be an opportunity. And for a program like this, I will be blunt, this is something we do. This is not something that we necessarily promote. It's not something we talk about a lot of, simply because stretching programs are really hard to get buy-in for. And so from a cost-effective standpoint, I believe in them. I think they have a place. I think they can work for people. But if people are doing them, and when you have a workforce that's been long-term and they haven't been doing them, then that's a really hard sell. But now we have kind of a different situation. They've been off for 2.5 months. So when they come back, there is likely a more open mindset to newer things. If you say, oh, we're coming back and we're doing stretching because you know what, we don't want you to get hurt, you haven't been working, well, that makes sense to people. That's not you just trying to add in something when we've been doing it this way forever. This is something that makes sense to the time. So if you've been considering a stretching or warm-up program, now may be the time to start looking at that, because people are going to be more open to it. It serves a purpose for them. They understand that, they may have gained some weight. They may not have been as active. I mean, yes, I understand. There's lots of people out there that took the time and have become marathon runners or, yoga masters. I don't know. I've not been one of those people, but, I hear they are out there. So kudos to them. And they may actually be coming back stronger. But I think the majority of our workforce is probably sitting in my camp going, that was hard. So if you are thinking this is something that definitely could add to just the conditioning of the human body as we start coming back to work. So some of the things that we've kind of put together that we're offering to help some of our employees, from the remote work perspective, looking at trying to make that remote work policy from a temporary turn into more, what is our temporary component of it, and then what are we going to be offering to our permanent? Because I would suggest that those two are different. The time commitment, the monetary commitment for sure, that an organization should put into a temporary workstation versus a permanent workstation should differ. They absolutely should. They should differ in the workplace, and they should differ remotely as well. So looking at how that policy changes, how that, works, and what is the organization willing to do from one aspect to the other. Looking at, are you empowering your employees to do self-assessment checklists, or getting them prepared to kind of just go through and making sure that they're set up properly. As well, that we're offering kind of, again, more webinars to how to develop that remote work program in a permanent way, purchasing standards and that type of thing. And then, of course, more education. Education is always going to be prominent, and specifically if your workers are not with you and they don't have you to kind of visually supervise and, walk by and say, oh, hey, you look like you're really uncomfortable. Why don't we change this? Then we need to be kind of readdressing that every so often and refreshing that ergonomic, because we do want to make sure those remote workstations are CSA compliant. And lastly, for those ones that are, SOAR, the people that are having claims, looking at potentially virtual assessments for those individuals. When we have the people kind of in the office, so again, we have the training aspect that really should happen, that refresher. Yes, we understand. You probably all know how to set your workstations up, but you may not have been able to do that for 2.5 months. And if you walk back in and your workstation isn't set up properly, you're going to sit down thinking, oh, this is such an improvement, but it's still not going to be enough to potentially, hold off an MSD. So making sure that refresher training is done. There's always the virtual or on-site ergonomist, which we will go in and kind of, it's just a lot more flexible. In a time right now that's in such flux, you may not understand what your ergonomic needs are and are just trying to be proactive because you don't want to walk down that path of high injury claims, in which case, we can go in, do walkthroughs, help adjust people as we see issues, provide education ad hoc for those that are, specifically those that are having a hard time reintegrating, as well as equipment audits and purchasing standards and that type of thing, just looking at how we can make people more comfortable with being in their old/new workspace. And just kind of going through that whole process. And then again, for those that are having issues, looking at a more in-depth risk assessment for those individuals. We talked about more frontline staff training, looking at the refresher training. This is also a great time to maybe do supervisor training, getting them equipped to do ergonomic inspections and checklists that are going to allow you to kind of manage at a lower level. Like, you're not going to address everything, but it'll allow you to kind of maybe say, okay, this isn't something we've seen before. This is low-hanging fruit. We can adjust this. We can fix this. This can make things easier for people to do as they recondition into work. Similar, we can offer the more flexible kind of on-site ergonomist approach, whereby we've kind of gone in and addressed any hazards, moved things if we can, like talk to supervisors saying, okay, this business too far, can we move it forward, and moving it right then and there. Looking at people, if your supervisor's having challenges with people, whether it be more cognitive related rather than physical, then sometimes having someone job coach them through some of the poor work methods and their proper body mechanics kind of one-on-one gives them a sense of just confidence and better understanding and making, duty of care type issues. And then work with any teams that you have, whether it be your Joint Health and Safety Committee, your continuous improvement, your engineering, and saying, okay, these aren't things I can fix today, but I think you could fix them, within the next few weeks. And how can we do that to make sure that ends up being ergonomically sound rather than going through process. The one thing I'm afraid of for people is that, they're going to buy into what I'm saying, which is great. You should be addressing your ergonomic issues, but that it's more of a spaghetti at the wall type solution, is that we start doing a lot of changes that we're just trying to get done quickly and not as thought out as possible, in which case we make things worse rather than better. So that's kind of where that works in, is we can work and make sure that the solution at the end of the day isn't adding any negative impacts from a physical or cognitive perspective. Okay, and as well as just generic risk assessments are available as well. So look at auditing your tasks first and foremost, and looking for those essential duties, looking for those opportunities to pull out elements to work hard into, rotation, any conditioning. All of those things are things that, you may want to sit down with some of your supervisors, your lead hands, anyone who you think is going to be an advocate for this type of thing, and just kind of anything, really, even if it's 2 or 3 things to start. it at least starts that ball rolling and starts people thinking, and getting your supervisors prepared for the fact that, this is going to be potentially, and I mean, I hope it's not the case, but potentially there's definitely enough red flags there that this could be a return to work, bit of a storm that we have to weather, because there are so many elements that have been added to the equation that we're used to dealing with. And unfortunately, your supervisors and some of the staff are going to be some of those people that are having issues. If they are ones that didn't want to return to work, that have a lot of fear and anxiety, and they are talking to someone that's having the same issues, well, we don't want that to turn into a, oh, yeah, I agree with you, and then it ends up being negative towards the organization. So looking at how prepared is your program? Are you scripting or teaching people kind of the conversation on what we should be talking about, how we are going to talk about it, how we're going to be respectful to the fact that this has been crazy. For lack of a better word, this whole thing has just been out of this world, and we're all just rushing to try and keep up. And so looking at how we're dealing with that. And if you're looking for resources, but aren't able to bring those resources in, are those resources available to you virtually? Are they going to be able to help you? So at the end of the day, it's not going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, but we wanted to make sure that while we're going through this kind of reopening phase and bringing people back to work, that we're not getting so caught up in the fact that, COVID, safety, and kind of ignoring the fact that these employees, physically and mentally, were not the same people that left you. And how are we prepared to not combat it? Because it's not something I feel that we need to combat, but we do need to work with it. And, at the end of the day, it all adds to us being a more robust workforce and a more understanding community. So all good things in the end, even though it seems like a bit of an uphill battle right now. But just looking at making sure that if there's things that we can do to help those deconditioned employees, that is not being dropped to the bottom of the pile, that it's, kind of up there, middle to above middle on our priority to-do list. So I thank you very much for joining me this hour, and I honestly wasn't sure whether I'd be able to talk for a full hour, and look at me, here we go. We are having another one. It's with me as well, so if you enjoyed hearing me chat, then I will be on next month as well. We're going to be addressing tech neck, and the whole just trend we're seeing with really high increases in neck and upper back discomfort and potentially claims, whether it's making it to a claim or not. I know just from discussions with people, this trend is increasing, and it's all due to the amount of devices that we're on and how long we're on it, and some of the stats are just staggering. But at the end of the day, research has shown us that it will lend itself to a claim eventually. So there's just no way the body can physically put out the forces and work that it needs to do for us to be on devices as long as we are. So if you're interested in learning more about that and how to address it and things to consider, then join me on June 23rd at 11 o'clock, and I'll see you then. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat section. I'm not sure I